Maria from Diplo here. Have you been watching? They have these wonderful little synopsis of each session. The only thing they don't do is they don't give the sessions a grade. So I think they need to say, you know, A+ or don't miss this, and sort of like movie reviews. That would be much more useful, or that would be useful as well.
Good morning, Veronica also. Hello.
Morning. Hi, everyone.
Also be very early for you or very late?
I know, yeah, in the middle.
In the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see, it's...
Hi everyone, I'm a host of this session for IGF. I have a question. We wait for two panelists. This is correct, or could you tell me, please?
Yes, we're still waiting on at least one panel lead. So I would say let's wait.
Okay, of course.
Maybe a minute, 15 minutes.
I wanted to tell you that session is recorded and hosted under the IGF Code of Conduct and UN Rules and Regulation, and the chat feature is for social chat only, and only the Q&A feature is used to ask questions.
Thank you very much for all you're doing for us to make this work smoothly. It's been quite impressive.
Okay, I get an email that there might be some issue with, some people have a problem with registering for this session, so that might explain why.
But you're talking for the first 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, Titi and I, and then maybe, I mean, if needed, we can still
start.
the
People
schedule.
are waiting, so we might as well start.
I would start and then see if, in the meantime, our panelists, and I see. Okay, so I would say, Titi, if you want to.
I can start?
Yes, I would.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on BPF on data new technologies. My name is Concetina Cass. I work for AGI Italian government, and I'm MAG member and co-facilitator of the BPF on data new technologies in the Ethernet context, together with Emanuela Girardi from POP Artificial Intelligence and with the Gezzella as a consultant of IGF Secretariat. So before to start the discussion, I want to share just with you a few words about the best practice forum on what is the BPF. The best practice forum actually are part of the intersessional activity that are led by the MAG. It's up to the MAG members to propose a BPF, and then a process is started inside the MAG, a discussion which analyzes the topics that are presented by the MAG and then approves. Then after the approval by the MAG, the BPF can start. So what is the BPF? It's actually a platform to exchange experience and also to address internet policy issues. So the BPF follows an open and bottom-up and a collaborative process that relies on community inputs and also has the objective to identify good and less best practice on internet policy issues. So the BPF actually works during the year. discuss on this issue, and then it culminates with this session that you are participating here to collect input, and then a report is issued at the end on the discussion and main results that have been collected by the BPF. So, but coming back to the BPF on data and new technology, internet contents, this BPF is focusing on how user data is collected, analyzed, and used, and on the best practice to ensure that data is used to bring benefit and not to harm users. And let me share also a few words of the agenda that we have today. We actually have a 3 main sessions. The first one, where Wim De Gezelle and Manuela Girardi will share the main point of the discussion held this year on the BPF, and also on the case study that we collect and how this case study have addressed the main challenge in the collection of data through these new technologies. Then we have the session led by Michael Nesson, Director of Technology International Affairs at Carnegie, and he will share with you how, we need new mental models and mindset. Our users are changing. Our COVID-19 had an impact on our use on collecting and use of data. And then at the list of our session today, we will have a discussion on the next step on how to address these issues in the future. So at this point, let me give the floor to Emanuela that will lead the next section. Emanuela, this floor is yours.
I see that Emanuela is not yet joining, so she's should be there. She has some problems logging in, but I think let me already jump to the next point, and that is say a few words on some of the activities we have been doing within the BPF. Let me share my slide. I have a short presentation, not too long, because I wanted to highlight one point. So the best practice forum, like Titi explained, we started discussing already early on in this year. I think it was in the end of February, and had regular meetings to first of all discuss what we want to talk about, or how do we want to define, further define and refine this issue of or this task we got from the MAC. To discuss best practice and start to look for the best practices. One of the points that came up early on was the question about definitions and concepts. The element or the question was asked, what exactly are we talking about? What we want to talk about? Do we use the same concepts and words? Do we use the same word for different meanings? It was a point that was flagged early on in the discussions, but I'm sure that in the next session, that's one of the elements Mike will come back on during the round table. I wanted to use this short time to flag or to show one of the outputs of those early discussions, and that's the BPF Data and New Technologies issues card. It is a short document, 2 pages, that maps different issues and challenges, concerns that came up when during the BPF sessions we asked, well, but what are now exactly the issues you think about when we link or discuss data and new technologies, and what happens with the users' data. I think we spent 2 or 3 calls on discussing these issues card, also put it online on the mailing list to get additional input. So what is that issues card? You have those different concerns, different questions, formulated as questions also. Why? Because we want to have them as a tool to help people to discuss issues and to have a dialogue, to start up a dialogue on specific issues, because we hear a lot about there are problems with data, there are concerns about data, but at very few moments people will be specific. They will all mention data as a problem or an issue or as a concern, or even data sharing, data collection, storing data. But even during the discussion, people will not really know or not really specify what they are talking about. And that can lead to a problem where also other different people around the table think that they're discussing the same thing, but in fact talk about something different. So the issues card is, like I said, a tool to foster dialogue. It also helps to raise awareness, and it should help to specify and focus the discussions. So the question is for who. I think the issues card could be used for by almost everyone, whether it are policy people or even politicians sitting around the table discussing the issues. But I also noticed that it can be interesting for individual users like you and me. If you think about your mobile phone and said, oh yeah, I typed something or I published something online, and I know there are specific data related questions or issues linked to that, but working on or putting together those this issues card also helped me to just raise questions for myself on, okay, what happens with my data? Do I know where it is stored? And things like that. And probably also as an individual, you can look to that issues card and go for, okay, are there questions in there that I should be concerned about? Are there other things that I say, well, basically they're interesting, but probably not something I should be concerned about. So where to find the issues card? We really hope that it can be used as a standalone tool or a standalone document for like to foster or to help building discussions. So it is available in the report, but also there is a standalone version available on the website. Thank you. I hope it is a useful tool. And then I see that Emanuela has joined us, and I would like to give the floor to her to take over and lead the first section of our workshop.
Okay, hi everybody. Sorry, I got some problem in the connection. I got confused with the timing with UCT, but I'm here now and we can start. Sorry, I missed part of the initial presentation from him, but I know that he probably gave a very good presentation about the issue card and an overview of how we developed the process of the BPF and how we reached to this point, to this final discussion today. Okay, so I'm here today with some very distinguished guests that I'm about to introduce to you. I already see Veronica Arroyo. She's a Latin America Policy Associate at Access Now, and she will present us part of the case study that have been submitted today during the process in the last months. Then we should be having in few seconds Ricardo Chavarriga. He will be joining us. I also got confused with the timing. And I haven't seen Cathal McDermott. Has he already joined us? I don't see him.
Yes, he is, but maybe he still has to be upgraded to panelist.
Okay, good. Okay. So the idea today is to, like Tim said, he gave us a good presentation about the issue card and the best practice using data to benefit and not to harm users. And so today I would like our guest to present us briefly the business cases that they submitted on this team and talk about their experience. So since Veronica is already with us, I would start with Veronica. So Veronica, with Access Now, she submitted a case study with the list of do's and don'ts for COVID-19 contact tracing apps. And what I would like to ask to Veronica is that if you can first introduce briefly your business case, And then in particular, if you can tell us which one are the main risk related to users' data, and in particular, if you can tell us which one are the best app globally that are kind of better balancing the do's and the don'ts that you listed in the case studies that you submitted. Please, Veronica.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Well, I'm going to briefly introduce first Access Now. Access Now is a digital organization, global one, has been working for the past 10 years, extending and defending digital rights in the world. And this time, I'm very proud to present the do's and don'ts guide for lawmakers or for states regarding contact tracing, digital contact tracing. This document is a very comprehensive one, and I feel very proud of it. And why? Because it was built by all the people that Access Now. As I'm saying, we're a global team, so we have technologists, advocates, lawyers, designers. So all the recommendations are very broad recommendations. They are based on data protection principles, and also they face the reality that we live, because we live in a very diverse world, and it's necessary to reflect that on the recommendation. So we have 8 do's and 7 don'ts. I am sharing this on the chat, so you can all check it out. I really encourage you to go there and check all the recommendations that we made. For us, it was quite important to have this document, even if we don't believe that, well, digital contact tracing can solve the problem that we're having right now, that we're dealing with. And also it raises a lot of red flags on privacy issues. We thought that it was important to give this kind of information to the governments and also shape the discussion, which is quite interesting, and that's why we're here. We use it also, and that's what you can find on our submission on a particular case here in Peru, because as you might know, Peru wanted to have and announced it publicly to have a contact tracing digital contact tracing app, and we use it to talk with the government, to start talking with the government, because the government is not quite open to talk with civil society. But this time, this helped to build this bridge between the government and civil society, and also to participate on all the debates that we have here. The good news is that at the end of the day, we don't have this contact tracing app here in Peru. For us, it's kind of a good news thing. And when you asked me about what are kind of the risks of using data at least in this moment of pandemic, for us is the misuse. When you change the purpose of using this data, that's kind of the big one of the big flags that we have, because now the governments are very, very, very positive on using this data for the pandemic to combat this moment. But one of the things that for us is quite important is to see what they are going to do in the future. If they're going to still use the data that they are gathering right now, that are processing right now, for other purposes, because there's a lot of sensitive data, and I think we have to pay attention on that specific point. So I stop here and continue on I can explain more on the questions part. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Very interesting. And also in Europe, we have several of these apps. We have one in Italy, where I'm located, in Muni, but we have several different apps in Europe that were really taking into consideration these privacy issues that you just raised. Thank you. Okay, I've seen that Ricardo Chavarriaga just joined us. So welcome, Ricardo. Ricardo is a senior scientist at Zurich University of Applied Sciences, and is the co-lead of Claire's task force on AI and COVID-19. So Ricardo, I would like you also to briefly introduce us the Claire COVID-19 task force, and then also to tell us which one are the main challenges related to the data collection, storage, and labeling that we faced actually during the task force experience. And then if you can also give us some, or if you could actually, or would give us some of the recommendation based on this experience for the policymakers. Please, Ricardo.
Yeah, thank you, Emanuela, for the introduction and for the invitation to share here the experiences and the lessons learned at the CLARE COVID-19 Task Force. So let's start by introducing CLARE. CLARE is a network of European researchers in AI, and it gathers about 400 research groups in academia and industry. And in March, given the effects of the pandemics, we launched a voluntary effort to gather scientists to help in tackling the effects of the COVID-19 pandemics. And we were able to enroll about 150 volunteers from different areas of AI and from different countries, trying to ask what can we do to contribute that. And similarly to the contact tracing apps, this was a period where there was a large number of expectation on how science and technology can contribute and help in this process. And so we aimed at contributing to that. And one of the first things that we saw is that there was many activities, a lot of information coming out, but it was not properly structured. So we first aimed at collecting information in a structured way about databases, about tools, about initiatives, about challenges that were directed towards the COVID-19 situation and help people to find the right information. And we also set 7 thematic groups that look at more specific ways and development of how AI can contribute that. And this included bioinformatics, medical imaging, analysis of social media activity. So throughout this period, some of the observations that we have is that there was a significant difficulty of collecting data and reliable data, labeled data. And this difficulty was mainly due to heterogeneity in the privacy regulation, in the data collection policies. There was a lack of integrated and common pipelines for data collection and storage across health institutions, across public bodies. So we were at a situation where there was a lot of data, but very fragmented. And it was very, very difficult to put it together so that we can have a proper use of it. There were some public and private initiatives on collecting data and trying to use it in certain ways, but there were certain lack of transparency on how this data is managed, what were the legal frameworks that applied, and also how the derived products of the use of this data will be later taken into account. So it will be public use, it will be private use, and how can we deal with the usage and the value generated by that data. Similarly to the data collection, there was a lack of available infrastructure for cloud storage and interoperable use of this sensitive data that we were collecting or that we're trying to use for the use of the artificial intelligence. And also, most of the data were not labeled in a consistent way or in a reliable way. So it's something that we have to take into account for future in technical developments on systems that can work with unlabeled data or unreliable data for basically an unlabeled world as we have right now. And to close in regards of recommendations, we think that it's important to take a proactive stance to build a more resilient infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I mean a flexible and agile fast response mechanisms that allow experts from different domains to mobilize and work together and have access to resources in the form of interoperable data that can be used. And this implies flexible governance mechanisms that may allow secondary use given extraordinary situations. And of course, when we think about that, we also have to think about oversight mechanisms that can respond in this flexible way when the challenges arise in that situation. And with that, I will stop and I will be very happy to further discuss in the Q&A.
Thank you, Riccardo. Very interesting, this idea on infrastructure for fast response using AI and data. Very interesting. I think we can further discuss it in the second part then together with Michael Nelson. about the new mindset. Okay, I've seen that Cathal McDermott just joined us. Welcome, Cathal. And Cathal is Senior Counsel in Privacy and Regulatory Affairs at Microsoft, and is working in particular in Microsoft Corporate External and Legal Affairs Department. So you will be, we mentioned before with Veronica the privacy issues, and Cathal will talk about the case studies that have been submitted by Microsoft. Microsoft submitted 3 case studies, very interesting. And in particular, he will talk about the one about the privacy principles that Microsoft designed to develop and implement the COVID-19 technological solution. So Cathal, can you please tell us which one are these principles, and then why Microsoft, that already had a privacy principles, decided to introduce a new privacy principles for COVID-19? And also, if you have then some time at the end, I would like to ask you if how Microsoft is in kind of promoting this awareness creation, that is one of the points that I read in your case studies, for individuals on how they, I mean, how their data is collected and how their data is used. So please, Cathal, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Emanuela. I think that, I mean, that's a great question, and we have quite a substantial body of work built up here in Microsoft around COVID. I think when we initially looked back at the beginning of the year, what Microsoft could do for COVID, we decided that given the global scale of the pandemic, technology was really, we understood it was going to play a very critical role in almost every facet of the response to COVID-19. And, Microsoft was in a position to be able to leverage a lot of our technology, from AI right through to other partnerships which we had with non-governmental organizations, government, civil society. So I think, to give a little context around some of the work we initially moved on, was that we partnered and joined with many state and national local healthcare organizations and providers, in addition to researchers and nonprofits and governments. And we were really trying to use our technology to help develop solutions to the COVID-19 pandemic. And, this was including solutions such as coronavirus self-checker tools, which we partnered with the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, helping launch coronavirus trackers on Bing, the Microsoft search engine, using AI to help decode immune system response to COVID-19, etc. And to get to the real nub of the question here, we understood that as we use companies' technology and sensitive data to help respond to the COVID-19, this was going to involve a certain level of tracking, tracing, testing to help fight the pandemic. And one of the most critical aspects in all of this response was always going to be how to protect and ensure people's privacy was continued to be protected. Of course, Microsoft and other companies out there, have a very deep and extensive privacy principles built into what they do already. But we definitely thought, given the novel approach that was being taken to fight coronavirus, this pandemic was new. It required a lot of new and interesting uses of technology. So Microsoft felt it was necessary to really reinforce and sort of double down on our privacy principles, especially as they relate specifically to COVID and our COVID work to respond to the pandemic. So at the ground level, really, on our belief here, we wanted to understand that people are in control of their data. People were empowered with the information to explain how their data will be collected and used. We believe this was absolutely critical to the success of the technology in the COVID response. And of course, furthermore, on top of that, companies needed to be accountable and responsible for this data. So back in April 2020, we offered 7 principles as really grounding ideas to help consider how we could ensure that privacy was respected as we've helped fight the pandemic. It's interesting to look at a high level at some of these principles and how they were adopted within Microsoft and across our response. So firstly, we were we deemed it extremely important to obtain meaningful consent and to be transparent about the reason for collecting the data, what data is collected and how long it is kept. We wanted to ensure that people understood that the data was only ever going to be used in a matter which was explained to them. It was clear and user-friendly information services, and people were able to interact with the technology to make informed choices. So that was at the very ground level. I mean, this was going to be the most key sort of aspect of how we were responding to COVID and ensuring privacy was protected. Secondly, we wanted to ensure that data was only collected for public health purposes. That the purposes it was collected for really were under the control of the individual and should remain under the person's control. It was not to be used for unrelated reasons, and I think that was very important that people understood, you know, where their data was going and how it was to be used exclusively for the pandemic response. Thirdly, and in line with you know, many ground line privacy laws and regulations out there, it was important to collect the minimal amount of data required for the response and for the solutions in question. So really limiting it only to the specific data required for the specific time period, ensuring that it was only to be used as necessary by the public health experts. We wanted also to provide very clear and meaningful choices to individuals about where their data was to be stored. You know, and there's been a discussion which we wanted to ensure was moved forward here around whether the data was stored on the cloud or on the person's device. And you know, we've seen that come up in some jurisdictions also, and be quite an important factor in this discussion. We also wanted to ensure that the appropriate safeguards, de-identification, encryption, random identifiers, all of those in our toolbox of encryption solutions were in place to help protect people's data from any harmful exposure and hacking attempts. I mean, we were very, you know, very sort of focused on the fact that this is extremely sensitive data and everything should be done to ensure that it's only used for the specific purposes in question. We wanted to ensure that the data was not, or the health status, of course, of the person was not shared without consent, or that an excess of data was shared with any third parties. So we didn't want anything to be shared beyond what was required for the particular solution. And of course, lastly, and in line with good practice and good data hygiene, that the data was deleted as soon as the purpose was achieved. So there was not to be any storage or unnecessary storage on the device or in cloud. Copies of the person's data were to be removed from any third parties or public health authorities that it had been shared with. And really, these principles from Microsoft were designed to apply certainly across the work Microsoft was doing, but also we believed it was a very good sort of grounding for any privacy work around COVID, which was happening with other companies and indeed the public health sphere and civil society. So that's kind of how we approached work and was the basis for our case study here to ensure privacy was front and center to our COVID work.
Okay, Cathal, very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing this with us. I think that the most interesting part was really the one where you said that, I mean, you try to empower the people, the persons, I mean, to understand how their data are collected and used and stored also. So this was very, very interesting. Thank you. Okay, I've seen that we don't have at the moment any questions in the chat. So I would like to thank Riccardo, Veronica, and Cathal. And since we are saving a couple of minutes, I will give the word now to Michael Nason. We collected lots of very interesting inputs from these case studies and from the presentation of Riccardo, Cathal, and Veronica. And I think I will ask them to stay with us. First, I will thank them, and then I will ask them to stay with us for the roundtable about the new model and new mindset about collecting and sharing data that will be moderated by Michael Nason. So please, Michael, I give you the word for the second part of the session.
Thank you very much, and thanks for some very useful context. I'm a technologist. I worked in business, and it always starts with the product and the service, and that's why I'm so glad we have these examples to work from. As Wim mentioned at the start, I'm the Director of Technology and International Affairs at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C. And it is currently 4:35 a.m. and I haven't had any coffee yet. But I'm very glad to be part of this. I'm here because I've been part of the Best Practices Forum group, and probably more importantly, was part of the preceding group that worked for 2 years on Internet of Things, big data, and artificial intelligence. And it's been a great pleasure working with Titi and with Wim and the other members of the group. But I'm also here because I provide some diversity. As a technologist, as someone who spent most of my career in the private sector, and as an advocate for regulation as the last resort, rather than the first reflex. So I provide some political diversity as well. And I'm also one of only about 3 people, I think, from the Western Hemisphere on this call, since it's 2 o'clock in the morning in Silicon Valley. I did see Jim Pendergast, who another person who's been at lots of IGF meetings. But most importantly, I'm here because in the past, after working at IBM, I had a midlife sabbatical and I taught at Georgetown University. I was a professor in the Communications, Culture, and Technology program. And I learned a great deal about how to talk about technology from journalists, communication specialists, sociologists. And that's what we're going to do today. I've been on the MAG in the past, and I've also been very involved in the IGF USA. And I know that one of the biggest challenges is getting people to talk the same language. The other problem with these sessions is that we don't have a good way to involve everybody who's part of this event, all of the audience members who might have something to say. And so I'm going to try something new. The other thing I'm known for is being disruptive and trying new formats. At the IGF USA, we've done debates, we've done policy hackathons, we even did a policy slam, which is a little bit like a poetry slam, where people get up and they announce what they would do if they were king of the internet or queen of the internet or queen of the cloud. And then the audience votes on which one they like best. So we're going to do something like that. We can't have everybody talking at once. So we're going to use the Q&A function of Zoom. And I apologize for those of you who are just calling in and don't have access to that, but most of you will be able to post on the Q&A session and also to rank the different things that are being posted there. So what I'm going to do is I'm right now going to post, let's see. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. Can I not post questions? This is not good. Okay, let me post to the chat room. A list of provocative statements. And I'm also posting in the chat room in the Q&A. But what I've done here is I've posted some policy problems that get in the way, policy statements and buzzwords that get in the way of thinking about data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, the digital society, human rights, and all the rest. And so what I want you to do is think about new ways to think about technology. And let me give you some examples. You'll notice that our report, although it talks a lot about machine learning and artificial intelligence, is not titled artificial intelligence. One of the reasons for that is because there's so much confusion about what artificial intelligence is. And there are literally 10 different definitions and they're quite conflicting. It's a term that's been used for more than 60 years. So what I'm proposing is that instead we talk about algorithms. AI is just a marketing label. And many of the problems that we hear about AI are really about spreadsheets and very simple models that don't involve artificial intelligence. The second term that we need to think new about is data governance. As the report says very clearly, and this is, I think, one of the most important findings, if we don't know what we're talking about, we're not going to get good policy. Data governance to a CIO means something very specific. It means, how do I manage my corporate data? Unfortunately, in a lot of rooms here at IGF, people have said data governance, and they're really referring to data policy, what governments are doing to control the flow of data and how it's used. And to say it's all one thing is misleading. So I'd really urge us to separate those two problems. What do individuals do? What do governments do? And use different terms. The third term that's really confusing a lot of people is ethical artificial intelligence. Technology is not ethical. People are ethical. So let's talk about trusted uses of big data and AI. Similarly, let's not talk about AI ethics. We can't even agree on whose ethical system to use. Let's talk about digital human rights. We do know what human rights are. We do have UN documents that define human rights. Another very, very confusing phrase is my data. And we hear people talking about how I need to control my data. Well, as we say in the report, you got to talk about what types of data you're referring to. So thank you for putting that forward. So on, hang on a second. So when you say my data, we should be talking about the stuff that I post on the internet, personally identifiable information that I've provided in forms, and then everything else. And there's a lot of everything else that really isn't my data. It might be a picture of my car as I drive down the road, or it might be a picture of me at a restaurant with a friend that somebody else took. That's not my data, somebody else took the picture. Okay, now let me get to the three most important and most misunderstood ideas. This is one that The Economist put on its front cover. Data is the new oil. This is the most destructive term and phrase that we have in this whole debate, because it makes countries and governments think that data is something they need to hoard, that it's a strategic asset, that somehow they need to track where it flows. Data is not oil. It's shareable. It's not consumable. You don't burn it. If I have my data, I can copy it and give it to you. You can't do that with oil. But the idea that data is the new oil is leading to the next problem, which is digital sovereignty and data sovereignty. That countries need to keep their data inside their borders. They have to have total control over it, just as they want to control their oil supply. Milton Mueller made the case very, very effectively a few days ago that we should talk about personal sovereignty. Let's give each of us the ability to know where our data is and to know it's protected. That requires a number of things. One thing that's really important is that we need to think about better encryption, better auditing mechanisms, better ways to know where my data is and who has had access to it. For my money, that's the most important part of the global data protection regulation, the part about transparency, knowing where my data is. The last one on the list that you're seeing is about cyberspace. This phrase was initially used by William Gibson to describe what he said was a mass hallucination of people linked together. Then UNESCO talked about this space where ideas flowed freely. But then the US Defense Department started talking about cyberspace as if it was simply a bunch of computers and networks linked together. And they started talking about cyberspace as the new battlefield. Cyberspace is not spatial. The internet is not in one place and it's not static. It's constantly moving as people move and ideas flow. The idea that we can somehow have cyberspace and draw boundaries around it is really causing problems. And again, the phrase itself, cyberspace, is leading to a lot of confusion. So this is a hard one, but we have to find a better term. I think cyber civilization, cloud of things. The Japanese talk about society 5.0. The last issue I'd put out here is also on the chat, and that is that we should stop talking about data brokers, people who just gather all the data together and combine hundreds of different data sets to get an incredibly accurate portfolio view. They do that because they need all the data in one place so they can run algorithms against it. There's a new idea, and one of the champions is Sandy Pentland at MIT, and that's data unions. These are third parties who take your data, store it just like a bank stores your money. And what that enables is people to run algorithms against data in hundreds of different places. And in each case, as the data is accessed with a particular algorithm, the algorithm will have to get permission. It will be very clear what data it needs to use and what data and answers it's retrieving. I mean, it might be a very simple thing like, is Mike Nelson, who in this group of people in Washington, D.C. is over the age of 18? They don't need to know 1,700 things about me to find that out. So this is the kind of new thinking we need, new terminology. So what I'd like you to do is, if you can, get onto the Q&A, start putting out ideas. Put out ideas on better terms. How would we replace the idea of a digital ecosystem? That is a great idea. Either in the chat or in the Q&A, put your suggestions out there, and let's have a discussion by the chat and by the Q&A. And at the same time, I would also ask my fellow panelists if they have any better ways of thinking about it. When I was at Microsoft, we spent a lot of time thinking about ways to convey the idea of the cloud and the Internet of Things that weren't so techy and connected to people in a very powerful way. I'm sorry I've talked so much. Clearly, we have a lot of mindsets to fix. So let's get some ideas out there. I just read a few that are here already. Digital self-determination instead of sovereignty. There was a great session on that earlier in the week. Jorge also mentions digital ecosystem instead of cyberspace. The one challenge I would pose to people is Nelson's law of buzzwords. You only get 5 syllables. So digital ecosystem is 7. It's still great. Maybe it's just ecosystem. I don't know. So let's think creatively. Let's think concisely. You get 5 syllables for the buzzword, and you get 8 words to explain it. That's really the way Washington works. And unfortunately, more and more countries seem to think in tweets and sound bites, not in policy analysis. So we're going to have to find a way to make these issues new. Anybody else, any of my panelists who want to weigh in? Do we have any good words, any other ways of saying cyberspace, data sovereignty, ethical AI, my data, any other terms that you propose?
Yeah, before launching into a new term, I just want to say that one of the things that I see here is that it seems that we try always to make a parallel with existing things. When we think of cyberspace, we then focus onto a physical space. When we think data as being new oil, we then imagine this as tokens, things that can be sold or exchanged, but data is something different. So one of the things that I think that we need to imagine is how to redefine what does it mean the public sphere in the digital age. Because the example of the picture is taken for me, there is certain aspects of that information that are personal, but they are not mine. Also, if I think about my data, we have to imagine how does this data ends up being of someone else. One is being transformed when it's processed by an algorithm. So I think before thinking about new spaces, we have to redefine what is this new public space for the digital age, because that's what we will set the boundaries of what is my data, in which I need to have agency, determination, and sovereignty. And then on the other side of that boundary, other rules will apply. So how to coin a term on that? That's a tricky one, but I guess if we continue talking about cyberspace, which gets often conflated with cybersecurity, then we're really going in the wrong space. And then I will mostly focus on how do we define the public sphere, and from then on we can identify how systems can be respectful of my human rights, my privacy, and the things that I should be autonomous and agent on.
The other really dangerous and crazy phrase is data is the new plutonium, which is mostly used by privacy advocates. It makes one very powerful statement, which is that data used the wrong way can cause a big mess. And if you get too much in one place, it can get a really big mess. But again, that it implies that we can keep track of every grain of data, and that we need a nuclear arms control treaty to control where it goes. I mean, it's interesting to read these things. I worked with Senator Gore back in the late 80s and early 90s, and he was very interested in metaphors. He was famous for talking about the information superhighway back when nobody knew what the internet was. And that was very effective, because it made it clear that we had this fundamental infrastructure that's going to connect our people. But some people took it one step further and said, oh, well, the federal government paid for the superhighway. Let's have the federal government pay for all these networks that are going to reach everybody. And we had to keep coming back and saying, no, the government paid for just the backbone, just the core of the highway, and everybody else had to pay for the roads and the driveways and the parking lots. So, but it was every time you come up with the short way of saying something, you have unintended consequences. But right now, we're in a world of just mass confusion, because people are taking all the old analogies and just applying it. Other thoughts from our panelists on how to talk differently? How to get that killer phrase, digital divide, net neutrality? What's the phrase that we need that's going to get people to rethink the data landscape?
An interesting concept, I think, is the one that has been promoted and developed by the philosopher Luciano Floridi, and he created this concept of infosphere. So basically, it started from the biosphere, and he created this infosphere that it's a kind of a digital, but at the same time, a real world that it includes the cyberspace, internet, the digital telecommunication, and also the classical mass media, basically. And so I think that thinking about a new virtual, but at the same time, a real world like this infosphere is, I mean, it will help us creating also a new mindset. So this is an interesting concept to me.
And what was his name again? Maybe you can post it.
Luciano Floridi is a philosopher, is the director of the AI and Ethics Laboratory in Oxford.
Okay.
At Oxford University, sorry.
Yeah, you might post his name in the chat.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Okay. Other thoughts, other things that people are I really like some of the things that Jorge is saying here about the digital ecosystem or the data ecosystem.
Well, on my point of what I believe is it's quite interesting what you propose to analyze how we frame, the concepts that we use and the phrases that we use for every in every aspect, right? Some of them I completely agree with them. Like, for example, instead of using ethics or AI ethics, move to digital human rights. It's more concrete concrete words that we can use, and enforceable words as well. There are others that maybe because at least me and myself, I'm also an advocate and an activist, and sometimes we obviously use those words, those big words, or trying to, as you mentioned, like the plutonium, or some headlines were also about the new oil of the data's the new oil, things like that, just to catch attention. But catch attention from people, it's important, but it's not the only thing that we should focus on. Because if you catch attention from people using catchy phrases or these ideas or analogies, sometimes you miss the opportunity to explain what you are talking about. And we are living, at least in a world where we need to, as advocates or as people who are very, very involved in this, is to be as clear as possible about the things that we are doing and not let the spaces for misconceptions. And that's why I at least from our perspective, it's good to have all the concepts clear, all the information is clear, and I think that the exercise is interesting to make us think and reopen our minds of what words we are using today. But I will also put more attention on how we explain this. So for us, what means for example, data sovereignty, which is a big word and which is something quite interesting to put attention on right now, on what governments are doing with data sovereignty, why they're using this word, and what this means exactly for them and for us as citizens. So I think we can listen and see what others think about this. I'm quite open to continue the discussion.
Well, I've worked with governments around the world, and so often the policymaker is dealing with 50 different issues. People are coming in to talk about corn crop, the weather, who they need to hire for a new position, and digital sovereignty. And they're desperate to have some analogy. And that's why we've got to pick the right one. I'm particularly concerned that people are so focused on the Internet of Things that they're not focusing on the data and where it goes. And so I always talk about the cloud of things, which is also only 3 syllables, because it gets people to think of the whole system and how we can design the cloud in a way that would provide better security. If someone says Internet of Things security or Internet of Things privacy, the first impulse is to secure the things, to regulate hundreds of billions of things. Well, let's regulate the data. Let's understand where the data from the thing is going, and not try to fix the problem by making sure every single 5-cent device has 17 different privacy functions. Kapil, I'm going to put you on the spot. And Microsoft has been such a leader in this space, and you have such a large branding and marketing team. What's the phrase that we are missing here? And I know you're a lawyer, not a communications person, but you know how important words are because you're a lawyer.
Yes, and thanks, Michael. I mean, it's a great discussion, really, to I guess figure out how to land messaging, and I think that's the real piece, which is at the heart of privacy right now. It's ensuring that the messaging which is delivered to the customer and to the folks whose data is being used at the heart of services, that it's clear and intelligible. And I'm not sure whether that is best served through these kind of let's say buzzwords or short phrases. Sure, they have marketing potential, but I think as you well represented, I mean, these lose nuance, right? There's a tendency always to focus on something which can be fantastic for a pickup in media or to get to the front of the news cycle, but I think that always comes with a loss of certain meaning, and I think that meaning is the space where the message is really communicated to the user. And I think really, I mean, privacy especially needs to be communicated in a manner which is clear and is meaningful to the audience, right? There's not a one size fits all. If we look at for example, let's say the constituency with children's privacy, I mean, that's quite a different level of understanding and communication than would be, let's say, to a seasoned technical expert. And I think companies are really understanding these differences now, and the shift that the same sort of carbon copy of messaging doesn't work nor land in the same way. And I think just understanding that is the piece which is really going to make the most sense here. And whether that is done best with a short, terse statement, which can also grab some news cycle, I'm not quite sure. I think we're better looking at this understandable sort of lack of legalese and something which can really understand and give that agency to the user. So I think I have a slightly different view, but simplicity is key here, and intelligibility.
So what do you do when the head of a country posts the statement in a tweet, "We must have data sovereignty"? It probably will be in French or German, but what would you do? What would you tell your CEO to respond if for some reason he wanted to respond to that tweet? Or if Brad Smith were to respond, what would be the phrasing and the term? Because I mean, sovereignty has always been part of running countries, right? How can you be against sovereignty? But no one's. How would Microsoft respond to a tweet like that?
I think when we look at the sovereignty issue, I mean, that's something which is clearly becoming more important right across the globe and occupying more news space. And we have and do see those types of messages coming out from countries more and more at the moment. I think though, once again, I'm not quite sure, I mean, how we would respond with a tweet, or even if a tweet would be the best way to respond here to this kind of debate. But I think, I mean, as you know, there are a number of ways to try and influence and move and educate around these debates. And that comes from, a number of factions within any company's sort of toolbox here to engage. We would of course be engaging on a policy level, but also via just our educational streams to help educate our users and Microsoft's audience. And it's multifaceted. These are difficult discussions, and
sorry to put you on the spot. That was unplanned. This has not been rehearsed. But Ricardo, Manuela, Veronica, Wim, I mean, how would you respond if the head of a country says, "We must have data sovereignty and we must have it now"?
Yeah. Well, if I backtrack a little bit on what we are trying to do here, is coming to this soundbite to open the door to the discussion where it really nails. So because we started from a set of different misnomers like cybersecurity, AI ethics, data governance, that all of them address specific issues. And this is where the clarity that Veronica was mentioning is needed. And then we also need this soundbite that say this is what all these issues entail. So if we really want to get to this soundbite, we need to agree on what is this thing that we want to get, or what is this scenario that we want to avoid. Because if we want to push to say one example, you want to push for sovereignty at individual or organizational or state level, we can imagine digital autonomy. If we think about, say, flourishing, we can imagine talking about digital empowerment or digital enlightenment. If we want to talk about protection, then we may talk about digital governance or digital regulation. But then what is this thing that we want to avoid, and what are these misconceptions that we want to clarify in terms of data as a commodity, the digital public sphere? What is this first point that we need to redefine, and we need to get societies and organizations to agree upon? And based on that, we can say all of these aspects, they point out to this. And someone may say the humane approach to digital technologies, because data is not the only thing. We may have other things that generate data, but have issues on their own. And then we may say, let's not talk about data, but about digital. And digital communities or digital ecosystems or digital spaces. Or we may say, yeah, we really want to avoid unforeseen events, and then we really put all the money into regulation and oversight. But then what is this thing that we want to avoid? And that will be my provocative question. And what is the challenge is that when we ask these questions, we end up with thousands. So what is this line that put all these issues together? And if we identify that, we can start with an explanation that takes a couple of pages, but that will be the best way to later narrow it down to these 5 syllables that will allow us to talk with the tweet-oriented leaders.
Yeah. Well, what you just said is incredibly important. You have to have that hub, that focus, that the seed that is going to be the one idea that everything else kind of grows from. And it may be what you just said, digital autonomy, or data agency, or personal sovereignty. The idea that I have the ability to control my data. It's a little bit like hate speech and content. There are governments that want to filter the internet, and they censor the internet. They don't want to give their people the flexibility to make their own choices and to pick their own filters. And that's the personal censorship function, is what a lot of platforms try to do, so that we don't have this pressure on governments to censor the internet. But again, it's how do we control data? Well, give users as much control as possible about data about them, not my data, but data that might be about me. So I call it two-way transparency. I'll give away data, but you're going to tell me what you're doing with it. Or mutually assured disclosure is another buzzword, but that sounds a little bit too much like nuclear war and plutonium. Any TT or anyone else? Anybody else want to weigh in on this? I know we're running out of time for coming up with the big idea. We've got a lot of big
maybe
ideas.
you can comment the what Evelyn has written in the chat, that as she does not agree about comparing ethics and digital human rights. Maybe you can just share a few comments on this. I don't know.
Can we promote Evelyn? I mean, I do agree with her quite strongly that AI ethics is this term that means everything. And so I've been in 3-day conferences where we've talked about everything, and at the end, people were more confused. I mean, the moment I remember, it was 25 years ago at the end of a UNESCO meeting. I stood up and I said, we've talked for 3 days. Has anybody defined info ethics? And the chairman said, well, you just weren't listening. And then a theologian stood up and said, no, Dr. Nelson is right. We have not determined whether it is Kantian ethics or Hegelian ethics or Confucian ethics. And then we had a 25-minute conversation about that.
I don't see if there is any hand raised. Maybe Evelyn or also Irene Gonzalo can intervene and see the comments that they wrote in the chat. I don't know. maybe you can just intervene in the discussion if you like.
Yeah, I wish also, I mean, Jorge has said a number of very important
Yes,
things.
Jorge
Chat,
put
and
a lot of
he
comments.
had
Maybe
some
also
very
Jorge
important
can
things to say at an
intervene
earlier
and share
session.
his comments, please.
But unfortunately, in the webinar format, we have to promote people to panelists, and I don't know that we can do that.
Yeah, I know.
So we have 20 minutes left. Perhaps it's time to go to the last section and to talk about how this report can do more to impact this debate. You know, what's missing from the report? Oh, Emanuela?
I just wanted to add something before your conclusion. I think that building up from what Ricardo said, to me, one of the most important things is probably to agree on ontology. So to agree on, I mean, what do we mean when we say like data that have to benefit and not to harm people? So these basic things, I mean, they have to be globally agreed. And then from that, probably we can start building like the vision or what a global vision probably that includes the governance of data. But the basic thing is really that everybody agrees on a kind of data ontology. So I think that this is one of the key requirements.
Well, one of the nice things about this project is it has brought people like Microsoft into the discussion. We had some great comments earlier in the week by Fujitsu, has their own 5 principles for responsible use of data and artificial intelligence. And again, a lot of overlap, a lot of best practices to choose from. And I think just highlighting some of those in our final report would be very helpful. So if anybody has other pointers, other sets of principles that we should look at, you know, we all know about the OECD principles. The European Union has come forward with some very interesting ideas on what needs to be done in the area of artificial intelligence in particular. But yeah, let's keep sharing. We do have an opportunity now to spend the last 20 minutes talking about what's next and how to get more ideas and more buzzwords and more tweets to shape the debate in the right way. Thank you very much, and thanks for trying this experiment. It didn't quite work the way I had hoped because not as many people upvoted.
Michael, Evelyn has been promoted, so I think she can intervene. We can give the floor to Evelyn. Okay. And then for Henriette, we will try to reply to this your question in the chat in the next session.
Can we promote Jorge as well?
Yeah, Evelyn, I think she can intervene now.
The audio. Yes, I unmuted myself. Okay, hello, do you hear me now?
We do, thank you.
Okay, great. So hello, everybody. Yeah, I was just my comment about ethics and human rights. I cannot agree really on that because while I'm working both on human rights and social ethics, and just to maybe specify that and also highlight the importance of ethics and also values, I think that like ethics really is about like the study or the science of different moral norms. Means that presumes that there are lots of moral norms out there, some of them legally binding, for example, human rights, but lots of them also not. And I think the concern of ethics is not just only to kind of say or judge what is right or wrong behavior, but it's comparing these different norms. And there might be situations where it's ethically correct to violate human rights, or you could argue that way. So it really depends on the point of view. And I think what underlines both like human rights and ethics are values. And I think it's very important when we talk about data, when we talk about new technologies and the internet in general, to also try to find an agreement on what values we want to base these technologies, like in the sense of what purposes should they serve. And once we can find an agreement on that, we should set the boundaries of the technologies accordingly. Like for what purposes are data supposed to be collected, for instance, for what purposes not? Did users agree to them? Did they not agree to them? And like a question really that connects then to the last governance question, which we didn't talk about so much yet, I feel, is in which fora can you discuss these questions? Where can you find such an agreement? And what political legitimacy also is there, in a sense? So, and what actors should be responsible, really, of talking about these issues.
I'm so glad you could bring this in, because I didn't want people to think I don't care about ethics, but I'm just being practical in saying we have a base to build on when it comes to human rights.
Yeah.
If you go to different countries and say, I think it's, we've done comparisons. You go around the world and you ask people ethical questions and ask them to make values-based choices. And it's amazing how different the answers are. When I worked at IBM, they did a survey every year of the new employees, and they had data from more than 300,000, actually it's 500,000, 500,000 different previous and current employees of IBM. And the differences between countries where people put the society and the community first, and countries like the US where we're crazy about individualism. I mean, the US is very unusual that way. So it's much harder to get this agreement on ethics. I think values is a better term, because when you talk to technologists and tell them, we're going to talk about ethics, they look blankly and think, well, I didn't take a philosophy class in college, but if you talk about values, that makes them more at ease and more comfortable. But if you say human rights, they at least know how to look that up and find what that means.
I think maybe a common conception is also norms, because there we can talk about moral norms, legal norms, social norms. And that's really something people can relate to as well, in a sense. Okay. And I would also specify that we should talk about human rights norms. And in a sense, they have the advantage, I completely agree with you, that they're already internationally agreed upon. I mean, that's something you can build on if you want to actually find some kind of agreement.
Let's turn over to Jorge, and then we'll turn it over to Titi, who can take us to the end. Jorge, you've had some great comments in the chat, and I really wanted to bring you into the conversation.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Introduce yourself, because not everybody watched your earlier session.
Sure. And this is Jorge Cancio from the Swiss Federal Office of Communications, doing internet governance issues. Thank you for putting me on the spot. You see, I am wearing my business attire, so I'm completely ready for this intervention. I will pick on what I said on digital ecosystem. I think that we've been focused on geographic, geometric analogies, metaphors for the last 20 years or more. And this has many limitations and many implications, which we may not like so much. And also it directs our imagination to something that can be governed, to something that can be taken, but to something that is passive and that can be dominated by us humans, I think. And if you take this idea of digital ecosystem, it is an interactive space, an interdependent space, to take the terminology of the high-level panel on digital cooperation. It combines natural and social relations between individuals and communities. And this also gives space to the idea which we are exploring of digital self-determination for the individual, but also for the communities. Ecosystem also brings with it the idea of systemic relationships, of dynamic relationships. Ecosystems are plural, and there's no one size fits all. There are differences within the ecosystems, And I think that especially in this present and future, where we are entering a time where digital is pervasive, where we are really becoming hybrid beings between our digital life and our normal or physical life. It's something that you cannot really distinguish anymore, and this will evolve and be increased in the next years. This notion of ecosystem is much richer, and also links it up to something we've been seeing during this IGF, that really the mega trend of digitization is absolutely and intimately connected to the environment and to climate change. And so I think it's a great idea. So I leave it by that.
Thanks for being part of the discussion. And I would just one final thought. I'm going to continue to monitor the Q&A, and I hope there'll be other ideas and people will upvote the greatest ideas. So many of the terms we use are so negative. And sometimes that's by design, but artificial intelligence, we don't want artificial food. Big tech, that brings ideas of big government and big brother. Again, there's so many terms that have been designed in some cases to cause a negative reaction. We've got to, and sometimes because of the movies and science fiction, terms that were positive got turned into something like killer robots and Skynet. So we have to think new ideas, partly to get rid of the old confusion and the old connotations. Anyway, thanks for a great discussion. We are going to incorporate a lot of these terms, and if we can find a way to say digital ecosystem in 5 syllables, I think we've got a winner. Okay, Titi, you want to wrap it up?
Thanks, Michael. So let's move to the last part of this session that refers to the discussion of data and new technology in an internet governance context. So what should be the next steps? We will try to share how we can address these issues and where and by who should be discussed, and what is the role of the BPS inside the new context of the IGF+, because as you know, the UN Secretary General has issued the roadmap for digital cooperation, which identifies priority on how to strengthen the global digital cooperation. Also, at the same time, we have the option paper of the COP champions on recommendation 5IB of high-level panel digital cooperation reports that also try to identify concrete ideas on how to move forward. And then we have also the MAG, the working group on strengthening strategy by the MAG, that has also gives useful suggestion on the way to go forward on this context. So, but then the question is where and how the BPF should be collocated in this new context. As you know, there are several ideas on this, because some are sharing the idea that BPF could be used as policy incubator to incubate policy and norms for public discussion and adoption. Some others say that should also have a role of a cooperation accelerator to try to focus on some issue and try to bring a range group of institution, organization, processes on this issue. So I want just to share with you and ask you some idea. What do you think? What should be the role of DPF in this new scenario that is the IGF+? So please share your idea in the chat, and also taking the floor and try to see what do you think about this. don't know if Henriette can say something on this, Wim. I mean, there are several ideas. What do you think? Should the BPF be used as policy incubator, as a cooperation accelerator, having a function of cooperation acceleration, having both functions? I mean, it's important to share it, to understand how the BPF should lead this discussion in the future, in the next scenario of the IGF+.
Can I say something about that?
Yes, Evelyn, please go ahead.
So something that I actually really like with the BPF, I mean, it's best practices in a sense. So it collects like best ideas, best ways of doing things. And I think there's a huge innovative and creative potential, which should be used for policy making. And actually a personal feeling I have within the IGF is that, I mean, it's Internet Governance Forum. The governance aspect, I think, is not so intensively discussed as it could be, in a sense. So I think it would be good to really kind of focus on creative or innovative ways of governance in a sense of incubator, policy incubator, as you just mentioned. This is my like spontaneous reaction to it, that in a sense that I think it would be really great if it could develop this way.
Thanks a lot, Evelyn. Is there any other comments, suggestion?
Maybe one comment. I'm not very familiar with these activities. My first intervention, but one thing that I'm somehow afraid is that there are so many discussions and so many initiatives that appear at the same time that we may have this issue of too many cooks, or that we don't know exactly where to pay attention to. I think it would be important to see how the interaction with other initiatives developing governance mechanisms and standards and recommendations can be cross-fertilized with interaction with this forum. And I liked a lot the previous comment about having a policy incubator for new forms of governance, because this is something that is becoming a recurrent theme when discussing emerging technologies in general. That the current approaches seem unfit, but we don't really know yet what do we need to replace them with. So I think having a policy incubator that has a good interaction and an active dialogue with other organizations developing standards, interacting with governance bodies, I think would be a great way to put forward the discussions that you are holding here.
Okay, thanks a lot, Riccardo. Is there any other suggestion, comments on this? Please share your ideas.
Titi, if I may.
Yes, please.
Well, thanks to all of you for a very interesting session. You know, I think that I think what's so valuable about a session like this is that it actually really brings together diverse ideas and perspectives on the problem. And in a way, it feels to me, and I know some of you that are working in the BPF also feel that as well, that this shouldn't be the end of the BPF cycle. In a way, it feels to me as if we are just beginning in some ways to come up with really creative solutions. So I think we should look at how we do BPFs in the IGF, how much time we give them, how many opportunities we give people to come together in this kind of format. I was just talking to Wim, maybe we need an intersessional event every year where a BPF or all the intersessional work of the IGF comes together to have this kind of session. So I do think we need to continue. I think we need to give the topic time. And I think we shouldn't be over ambitious about finding so-called best practices. I think that in a way becomes quite intimidating. it's useful, but maybe that can also limit the collaboration that emerges from the BPF process. But I just invite all of you to come to the session later today where we're looking at the future of BPFs, because it's the moment now. We need to look at how we can strengthen and evolve this modality. Thanks, Titi.
Okay, thanks a lot, Henriette. Is there any other comment, suggestion, idea?
This is
Michael.
Mike. Yeah, I can just add to what Andriette said. Best practices are great, but when I was in government and business, I found that worst practices and worst practices, particularly if you understand why they didn't work, were often more useful, but nobody wants to talk about failure. So I hope we'll do more of that.
Can I maybe add something to that? I think it's I think best practices, I don't think they have to be real necessarily. I think we can also analyze the worst cases and then think about how should we have done it better. I don't think that we always need these practical case studies in order to talk about best practices, but in a sense, we can also discuss what could be done better without the real cases. That's how policies are usually designed and drafted. Like just thinking, how should we do things? How can we do them that better for the future?
Thanks a lot, Evelyn. Anything else? Veronica, do you want to add something? Georgi?
Yeah, I think what it's important, and I agree with some of the people who are writing on the chat, is that we can also, I agree that this should not be the end of the work that the BPF does. I think as people who we want to continue working on this, it's important for us. It's important also to include cases from other parts. I agree with Evelyn saying that we can start working on cases and see and analyze those cases from a neutral point, and from that create our best practices. I think we're really here coming and hearing from different perspectives. That's really important. So I will advocate for more diversity and more work that we can do. I think there's a lot of people who are really interested in that, and yeah, I think that's really great.
Okay, thanks a lot, Veronica. We have a few minutes left. I will take the floor to Wim. Maybe you can add a few words, Wim, because we are out of time, so I don't think we can accept other comments. Is it correct, Wim? Can you?
We're already 1 minute over time, but I would like to say two things. Coming back to the discussion I was having with Henriette offline, I have the same feeling as I had last year at the IGF, that this is a great starting point for a BPF discussion. And sometimes it feels a bit, I feel a bit sorry that this could have been a wonderful discussion to start developing the dialogue throughout the year. So we should be looking into a way on how to capture this and build on the discussion we had today. The session, Henriette also pointed at to discuss the future of IGFs and also follow up on this topic is later today at 1:30 UTC. So you can see that in the schedule. It's the title is Preparing IGFs for the Next Cycle and Following Cycle. So it's at 1:30 UTC. So I suggest that this discussion we continue there. And then for this year's BPF, I will just point two links in the chat. The idea is that the BPF document itself is finalized shortly after the IGF. So we would welcome additional comments and feedback on this discussion and the report, either by email, or please don't hesitate to subscribe to the mailing list and continue the discussion we had today over there. So then I would like to thank all for participating to this session, and I hope to see many of you later on at the discussion at 1:30. And thank you to the panelists and the facilitators.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Manuela, thank you so much for recruiting some of our panelists. This worked out really well.
It was very interesting. Yes, very interesting
Yes, that
discussion.
has been very interesting because several comments came in the chat. So I hope they will participate also to the next session, to the 1:30.
Yeah.
So,
I wish we had a better way to do live collection of ideas and ranking. I mean, I thought we could do that with the Q&A, but it didn't work very well. But we got a lot of good stuff in the chat, and people were piling on and saying, yeah, that's a great idea. And oh, I don't agree with that. So there was a lively discussion, just like you'd have at a regular workshop. So
yeah, I don't like the webinar forum because it's not allow too much interaction. Higher yet.
But I understand why they can't do that.
To respond to Michael quickly, I discovered another tool for another activity I'm involved in called Padlet, which is like it's like a pad, but just go to padlet.com and you can run it while you're having a Zoom session. You would put your questions in the Padlet, and then it's a bit like a mind map. And then people can type their responses and their questions on the Padlet, and you can then export it as, you know, PDF or text or whatever. So it's kind of quite a nice feature, actually, that works well. But you guys did a great session. It was very dynamic, and you know, the discussion was really good. So I think Wim is just absolutely right. I think this kind of energy is really what you need earlier on in your process.
Well, you have to do something new and different. So,
well, we have an idea. Wim and I have just come up with an idea, an intersessional IGF.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Intersessional IGF, all year active.
We just take the second open consultation, which is usually held in May or June, and we add another date to it, which is just for IGF intersessional modalities. It's for BPFs and for DCs and NRIs or policy incubator, you know, or whatever else we have. So it's not an IGF like this. It's an IGF specifically for the BPFs and for the DCs and the NRIs and whatever other modalities we have, you know? So I think that's doable.
And that's, I mean, I totally misunderstood what you said. I thought you were going to go biannual.
No.
I think Chengetai and company would revolt.
No, to be
I'll have those travel funds that we didn't use.
It would be a one-day event. That's all, just one day.
I mean,
the other app that I've seen used very successfully is Slido, SLI.do. And that allows people to post and questions to bubble up. But you know, I was surprised because when I'm a panelist, I can't post questions, and so this whole thing was going to depend on me posting questions and seeing what people thought. So I had to post in the chat, and that was okay.
That's the terrible thing about webinar format, because I mean, you can make it inclusive by putting everyone, you know, making everyone a panelist, but then no one can post Q&A.
Or answer it. Yeah.
Well,
okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Good luck with the intersessional celebration.
You know, Michael and I were on the mag together, TT.
We caused lots of trouble. Lots of trouble.
We used to argue quite a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.